Inside the halls of San Diego State University lies a program dedicated to storytelling and pursuing the truth. Welcome to Where You At, a podcast that takes you inside the work of alumni for the School of Journalism and Media Studies at San Diego State. Our goal is to show the success of our alumni, inspire students with the stories, and connect students and alums on a pathway to journalism success. And now, here's your host, Josh Sushan.
This week on the Where You At podcast. Hey, we're back on campus. We are in the podcast room, and I always get excited about new episodes when we talk to someone who has done a wide variety of things with his or her career, because this way we can learn a lot of different types of industries for journalism grads. Our guest this week is Tim Grenda. We both went to San Diego State at the same time in the 1990s. We worked at the Daily Aztec way back in the day. He has been a newspaper reporter. He's covered news, arts, and entertainment. He's covered courts. He's covered death penalty stories. He went to law school. He's been a law clerk. He's worked in digital marketing. And now for the last 4.5 years, he once again works for San Diego State University. He is a content strategist, search engine optimizer manager. That was a wordful. Tim, welcome to the Where You At podcast.
That was a lot. I can't believe I've done all that, but I guess I have.
You have done all of that. So, we're inside this podcast room on campus. Would you have ever thought in the 90s that we would be using this types of technology and that our industry has grown the way that it has?
I did not. A lot of what I've done did not exist when we went to school here, and that's the crazy thing.
Yeah.
But, the skills I built here with the journalism school and writing and have all applied to the journalism work I've done into the search engine optimization and content strategy. That's what they call it now. Work that I do for Global Campus. So it all fits on some crazy way.
Let's start right there with what you do. Like, dumb it down for me and other people who don't know what this means. Like, what specifically do you do?
Well, I create content in the form of blog posts, social media posts, ebooks, white papers, all about for SDSU Global Campus, which is the former College of Extended Studies. It's the extension of SDSU. We extend our programs, degree programs, and certificates across borders all around the world. Students can take classes online for the most part. And so I create content to feature those programs and sell them, get people to enroll in them, basically.
Yeah, so that was going to be my next question. When you're a newspaper reporter, it's very easy to know, like, okay, I did my job for the day, right? Like the story came out. Worked for a TV station. Okay, I did this package. Maybe you got a scoop. Maybe you just interviewed someone. Maybe you furthered the conversation. How do you know that, hey, I did my job today and I'm helping things happen the way that they're supposed to happen?
Yeah, it's not quite as transactional as it was in the news business where you'd come in the morning and pick up the paper and say, well, there's my 12 column inches for the day. I did my job, right? It's much more long range. But really, I just look at the blog as the Global Campus blog is just like a newspaper, and we're just featuring our programs and our people and our students and our staff. So it's never boring, and there's a lot. The thing I appreciate is the editing capabilities. You make a mistake in the newspaper and you'd want to go around town and buy up all the copies of the paper. I can't believe I misspelled someone's name. You do it now. You go into the blog and you fix it, and no one's the wiser. So
right.
I do like that part of it.
Tell us like some of the blog posts that you've recently done, just the ones that kind of took off the most, where you get the ideas, how long they are. Give us more about, what you're writing.
Yeah, well, a lot of them are specific to our programs. And so I found a success with doing kind of a 2024 trends in criminal justice. And for a long time there, because we offer a degree completion program, a bachelor's in criminal justice. And for a long time there, if you were to Google criminal justice trends and trends in criminal justice, our post was number one. And it drove a lot of traffic to the website. And then hopefully a lot of people were interested in the program too. But so those annual trend pieces tend to do pretty well, I think, kind of timing it to a particular year. Of course, then when the calendar flipped to when it flips to the new year, it's pretty much going to go away, I guess. We'll have to refresh it for the new year. But so much of our blogs are just helpful for people, tips on how to apply to grad school or how to set up the perfect at-home study space and things like that aren't specifically like about a program, but more about the experience of going back to college after a break. A lot of our students, they start a bachelor's degree and then life happens. They get married, they move, they get pregnant, whatever, and they have to kind of put a pause on things. And this allows them to come back, and they're not going to move back into Zura Hall, and
Right.
as fun as that would be, they want to finish it on their own time. They have a full-time job, they have a family, so this gives them that flexibility to finish online. And so a lot of our blogs and social posts that we do are just kind of about that place in life, kind of, why you should add a certificate to your resume. Will my employer pay for me to go back to school? That was a popular one, because in many cases, a lot of times, employers have these programs that, hey, if you want to go back and get your bachelor's or your master's, we'll pay for it. Mm-hmm. So that was another one that did pretty well. But I use tools like search engine tools, looking at search volume and queries and things like that to determine what people are asking and what they're looking for. And then we just give them what they're looking for, basically.
All right. So that's the perfect segue into SEO, search engine optimization. And I think maybe it's best to start with, where was it? Where is it now? And I don't know how much we know where it's going, but kind of give us, the Reader's Digest version of what it used to be. Because in my mind, I think about really boring content where you just keep repeating the same question and answering the question over and over again. Is that still the case? Am I wrong or what?
Thank God it's not.
Okay.
It used to be, you'd write like back in, I got into it in 06, and there were people that ran it before then, but 06 was pretty early. If you're looking for a Fort Lauderdale dentist, the best Fort Lauderdale dentist is Tim Grenda. And if he's the best Fort Lauderdale dentist, and just repeating Fort Lauderdale dentist for the hope that you would rank for Fort Lauderdale dentist. Google got wise to that because a lot of us SEOs were doing all kinds of crazy, like keyword stuffing, they call it, and buying links from these link farms overseas that would link back to your website. A lot of these kind of black hat, as they call them, SEO tricks and tactics have pretty well been wiped out by Google. They would put out algorithm updates, which they do all the time, and sort of minimize those things and devalue those things. So thankfully, I don't have to do any of that anymore. I can just write natural voice. They focus a lot on expertise and authority and trustworthiness. You'll hear them talk about E.A.T, E.A.T.
What does that stand for?
Expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. Just kind of, they just want good information. I mean, I'm saying Google because Google's 85% of the market. Mm-hmm. Like Yahoo, DuckDuckGo, all the other search engines are sort of small players. But Google, they all have their own algorithms. But Google, they just really want answers for their people that are searching. They just want the best content. So I just find that I don't really have to engage in any of that kind of trickery like we used to. And I think the future is more AI, more AI written content. And I think there was a big jump on that a year or two ago when ChatGPT came out. A lot of SEOs said, well, my job's toast. Mm-hmm. But I mean, the bottom line is it's just like, the plumber who goes from a screwdriver to a drill. It's like electric drill. It's like you still need somebody to work the drill. The drill's not going to work itself, and neither is ChatGPT. So you use it as a tool to scale and to maybe frame out a section of an article, but I don't copy and paste from ChatGPT into the blog. That would be crazy.
Yeah.
But I think more and more that's kind of the future of kind of sorting that out. And you see the AI box in Google search now. When you search something, it'll kind of summarize it for you. And it's kind of like, okay. But I think that's the future, and it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out.
Let's go to the past for you. It's my favorite question for this podcast because it's so simple, yet so effective. Why San Diego State? Why journalism?
Well, journalism, as a young kid, I wanted to be a journalist. I didn't really know what it meant, but I just liked telling stories and writing. And so I grew up in Solana Beach, about a half an hour north of here. And I don't know how I ended up at San Diego State. It was like a local school, I think, and I didn't really want to go away for school. And so I did the community college, went to Miracosta College for 2 years, did all my GE stuff, and then I came 92 to 94. So I don't know. I wish I had a really great story about how inspired. I mean, I certainly went to Aztec games at the Q and the Murph, whatever we called it then. And I certainly was a San Diego State fan. But I just kind of came here and really loved the Daily Aztec experience. When we were there, it was truly daily. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was every day. And we were cranking, I got to do a lot of experience and make a lot of mistakes in a safe space. And yeah.
So you wrote news at the Daily Aztec, but I remember you most writing arts and entertainment. I'll never forget that you interviewed this up-and-coming comedian, Jon Stewart or something like that. I'll never forget that you interviewed Jon Stewart. I thought that was the coolest thing. You interviewed Lenny Kravitz and the lead singer of Stray Cats and Ellen DeGeneres. And I'm wondering what we can learn from what you did in order to be able to interview big names when you were a college student at the campus newspaper.
I think it was just the Aztec the San Diego State was a lot of them were coming to perform here at the Open Air Theater, and they used to have concerts in Montezuma Hall in the back door. And so these touring acts, like you said, would come through and they'd do an interview with the college paper. And at the time, I just didn't really even think about how crazy it was. But now you look back, you're like, man, that was pretty wild to like talk to these people at that level as a college kid, you know. But, I think we had an audience that they wanted to tap into as college students. And so it kind of just made sense that they would talk to the college paper.
How much of it do you think is like you just have the guts to do it, or maybe you're even just like ignorant that it's a big deal, and you're just like, whatever it is, the publicist, whoever the person, whoever the gatekeeper is, I'm just going to try.
Yeah, I certainly wasn't intimidated by it. I don't remember thinking this was crazy. It totally made sense to me to interview the Brian Setzer from the Stray Cats when they were coming to the Belly Up. He had just started his orchestra, and that just made sense. Ignorance is bliss.
Were you the type that wanted to write out your questions or kind of give yourself bullet points? Yeah,
I used to do that. Yeah, I was pretty crazy about that. I would at least, but I noticed as the years went on, they got kind of more like an outline and not so much the questions, but more kind of like what we have, what you prepare now is just kind of bullet points. But I do remember writing out the questions and.
You got to have a good story. Give us a good story about somebody. Lenny Kravitz, Jon Stewart, Ellen.
Okay, well, put yourself back in. This is the spring of '94. Nirvana was huge,
right?
And I was talking to Brian Setzer from the Stray Cats about how he transposed the rockabilly stuff in the Stray Cats to the big band sound. And he kept getting a click. Remember call waiting back in the '90s? It would go click, 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 click. And he said, "Let me answer this," because we're on the phone, and I'm recording it on a little micro cassette. And he says, God, hold on a second. I got to take this call. I said, okay. And he was gone long enough that I turned off my tape because I was burning tape. And then he comes back and there's all this yelling in the background. And I said, what's going on? And he said, did you know that Kurt Cobain shot himself? And I said, no, I hadn't heard that. And I mean, this is like a big, And I said, no, I hadn't heard that. He said, yeah, just this morning. My video director was his video director. And he just called me and told me they found him. And I said, oh. And I said, well, do you want to keep doing the interview? He said, yeah, sure. What were you talking about? And I said, we were talking about jazz chords. And okay, yeah. So we talked for another 20 minutes or so. Then at the end, I said, well, that's all I have. I'm going to look into that Kurt Cobain thing. And he said, yeah, it's crazy. And so I literally stood up in the middle of the Daily Aztec newsroom and said, do we know that Kurt Cobain shot himself? And everyone kind of looked at me and said, what?
We didn't have Twitter back then.
No, there was nothing.
The best thing you could do is turn on MTV News to find out if Kurt Loder was talking about it.
And scooped him, yeah. And so Eric Reif, who was the arts editor, came over and we got out the Rolodex and called Geffen Records. And I said, Brian Setzer from the Stray Cats just told me that Kurt Cobain's dead. And we called Geffen Records and they said, well, we're putting out a statement. And we all went, ooh, they didn't say no. They said they're putting out. And so within hours, it was everywhere. And then a couple weeks later, I went to the Belly Up in Solana Beach where Brian was playing. And I got to go backstage and meet him. And he was walking up and I said, hey, you don't know me, but I was who you were talking to when you found out that Kurt Cobain shot himself. And he goes, wasn't that crazy? And I'm like, it was crazy. So yeah, it was just stuff like that. It was really weird. And I mean, there's nobody nowadays, I don't even know who that would be, who this generation's Kurt Cobain would be. Mm-hmm. He wasn't like, I don't know that there is anyone really like that now. It was such a big shock to us college kids.
That's crazy because I was not in the newsroom because I would have remembered that. So I don't know where I was. I was probably at the baseball field or something like that is where I probably was.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy.
Any other fun, crazy stories that really stand out from back then?
From the art stuff?
Or anything,
I remember having to Ellen had this show, it was called These Friends of Mine, and it was like her first sitcom. And she was just kind of a stand-up comedian. I mean, it's funny to look back now. I mean, she's such a big name now, but at the time, I'm not even fully sure that I knew quite that much about her. But she was really funny, and she was talking about how it was her first sitcom. So, they made her character's name Ellen because they were afraid she wouldn't answer if they named her Linda. They would. Yeah. So it was just kind of funny. I remember her saying like, "Yeah, they named her Ellen because otherwise I wouldn't think to answer when they called me. And they said my name." So yeah, it was interesting. It was fun, and I'm a musician myself, and so it was good to get to talk to people about a little deeper about playing or the sound, crafting songs and stuff. So it was really good. And like you said, we had such great access. I mean, I would get to go talk to these people that were just big names at the time. I mean, you name some of them. I mean, these guys were huge stars at the time. And here is Tim Grenda from the Daily Aztec. They're probably telling their publicists, like, who is this kid? But like I said, we had the audience. So
you worked for the Del Mar Sun, the Daily Pilot in Costa Mesa. You covered courts for the Riverside Press Enterprise in San Bernardino. You witnessed an execution.
I did.
At San Quentin. Tell us that story.
Yeah. Well, I was covering the courthouse in San Bernardino, and there was a guy who had committed a really terrible murder like in the 80s, and his number got called. And so I went as a media witness and went up to interview him a couple weeks before the execution. And, I had in my notes that he had escaped from Utah State Prison. I'd seen it somewhere in the file. And so I asked him, well, tell me about this. And we were sitting across the table from each other, just like we are now, no glass on the phone. It was just
was he handcuffed or anything?
Yeah, he was belly chained, I think.
Okay.
Foot, yeah. And I said, tell me about this escape from. His name was Stephen Wayne Anderson. This is back in like 2002, I think he got executed. And I said, well, tell me about this escape from Utah State Prison. As a reporter, I'm thinking this must be a great story with the searchlights and the hounds running through the field, through the marsh and everything, like you see in the movies. And he looks at me and he's like, what are you talking about? And I said, they said you escaped from state prison in Utah. And he said, oh, I was on work release and I just went to work and didn't go back one night. In the 80s, if you were kind of a run-of-the-mill burglar or something, they would let you go to work during the day and then you had to come back at night, and he just didn't go back. So it wasn't as dramatic of a story as I was hoping. But that was so they have people, the media. There's some reporters that go to every execution, like from the Sacramento Bee and the San Francisco Chronicle. They go to kind of help ensure the transparency of the process. And then there's members of the community that people that live in Marin and San Francisco, they go to kind of keep it all accountable, I guess. But then there's a group of local reporters that kind of get picked from the particular area where the crime occurred. And that was me. And so, it was pretty wild. I mean, it was...
I feel like a really important word in journalism is nuance, right? Is covering the whole nuance of the story, of not just like trying to dunk on someone. So when it comes to witnessing an execution, what's the nuances that you would look for as a reporter of what to observe and what to write and who to interview? Yeah,
I really just tried to get into the real details of what was happening and his movements. And I remember it was a lethal injection execution. So they basically put him up on a medical table inside the old gas chamber. It's the same structure, but he's on like a medical table. And I remember watching very closely as like these nurses who probably had administered thousands of IVs in their lives. They were administering this IV that was very much different, right? It was going to be the last one for this guy. And I remember seeing them, and they were across his body, and the one was trying to pass the other nurse some tape to like tape down the IV line, and his hand was just shaking so that the tape was like fluttering like a flag in his hand. And I'll never forget that I could feel his nerves from like, this is serious. This is not,
You say them. I want to interrupt for a second. Isn't there, correct me if I'm wrong, isn't it something where like multiple nurses inject, but they don't know which one actually has the lethal?
No, that's the firing squad.
Okay.
They used to say that about the firing squad, that they'd have 3 guys shoot, but only 2 of them had blanks, so that for their conscience they could always say. No, the lethal injection is done behind a door, and you kind of hear some faint beeping and some medical sounds that happen. But no, they just administer 3 very strong drugs that basically stop the heart and stop the breathing. And it all happens pretty fast. I mean, but in reporting it, I really, because I did a column the next day, and we of course did the news story about Stephen Wayne Anderson was pronounced dead at a certain time, but we did a column the next day of kind of my experience of going and covering it, and that was where I got into more of kind of they put you on like a airport shuttle bus and drive you to different locations in San Quentin, and you just keep getting closer and closer. And we're looking at our watches like, dude, it's like 11:50. Like, Are we on schedule?
Yeah.
And, the guards are like, and you talk to the prison psychologist, you go in and the guy says, well, you may have trouble with this. A lot of people have nightmares. And of course, I'm like, I've seen people hit by trains. I've seen crazy stuff. This isn't going to bother me, and I'm kind of like, whatever. But I did a lot of that experiential stuff there of kind of like the experience of seeing it. And it was definitely something I remember very well.
Did it ever impact you later?
No, I don't know what that says about me. But no, I didn't really lose any sleep over it or anything.
Yeah.
It was very clinical and very people. Some of the reporters that were there from the other papers that go to all the executions, they had seen like gas chamber ones, and that's apparently really hard to watch because it's terrible. But the lethal injection was very much going to sleep more or less.
Yeah.
So it wasn't, it wasn't too gory.
I feel like no matter what your profession is, at some point in your life, you need to watch a trial in person. You need to be there to see the mechanics of it. And there's only one that I've ever attended. It was for the book that I wrote. Shout out to my book, Murder in Pleasanton.
Yeah.
I was fascinated by the whole thing. I'd never been inside there. Someone who'd worked in sports my whole life. What should reporters know about what it means to cover courts and what do you watch for and just learning the mechanics of how courts work?
Yeah. Well, the one thing that's really interesting is how orchestrated it is. And, those Perry Mason moments where the back door of the courtroom flies open and in comes the guy who's going to exonerate him. It's like that would never happen. They don't allow. The rules of court are such that it's very planned out. Like the defense is going to ask these, you ask these questions and then then the people get this chance. So it's all very sort of orchestrated is the only word I can think to use. So not that it can't be dramatic, but it's as a reporter covering trials, you generally know what's going to happen before it happens. There's very few times where I was shocked. It's usually like, you talk to the district attorney, you talk to the defense attorney, not the judge so much, and they kind of tell you, well, we're going to talk to the sister and she's going to testify to this, and then we're going it's all very sort of
So would you say then that it's the motions leading up to the trial are even bigger than the actual trial? Like what evidence is admissible and what's not?
Oh yeah, that's a big part of it because there's that can change the whole. I mean, if they rule that some evidence is inadmissible and that could change the whole course of the trial. And it did. I remember seeing times where they wanted to admit some piece of evidence, either, testimony or physical evidence or something. And the judge said, no, it's too prejudicial, or it's not, the chain of custody was broken and we don't know if it's actually legitimate or not. And but see that reporting kind of, unless it's a really high profile trial like OJ or something like that, they don't want to. We don't write articles about that. It's more just kind of understanding the scope of what might happen during the trial itself.
The part that I found most surprising is that as a journalist my whole life, we're taught, don't ask yes or no questions. You want these open-ended questions, right? You want to get who, what, where, when, why, how much, compare, contrast. And then you get into the courtroom and the lawyers very much just make a statement and they say, isn't it true that? And then they blah, 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 and they just want the witness to just say yes. That is their whole point. Right? They do not want the witness talking. They just want the witness saying yes or no.
Well, and the other rule is they always say don't ask a question that you don't know the answer to, because that can go really sideways on you if you say, well, isn't that true? No, it was actually this. And,
Yeah.
It's in some ways, the stories write themselves, because sometimes you just write the lead of like what this person is accused of doing, and it's like, oh my God, But at the same time, it's about distilling something that's very technical in a way and can be pretty dry. But then there's those moments where there's just something really emotional happens or really human happens in court with someone testifying or saying something in a certain way that kind of carries it. But a lot of it's just kind of processy,
What about like the emotions at the end of a trial?
Yeah, that reading the verdict, I had a lot of times where the bailiffs had to remove, a defendant's mother or a victim's mother or dad or something. And that all factors into it too.
Yeah.
It's
Again, I can only refer to one court case that I covered, and it was a very famous murder in Pleasanton that took them 3 decades to solve. And the victim's brother, it's like 5-10 minutes into day one, and they showed photos of the victim from, like the autopsy photos. It's the first time that anyone had ever seen these. And he like fainted, right? And or was about to faint, and he's sweating profusely. And I remember just thinking, okay, we didn't learn this in journalism, right? Like this is where we just learned on the fly about here's the victim's brother and he's white as a ghost and he needs help getting out of the room. But then like, okay, that becomes such a huge part of the story, right? Like that's kind of when it hits home to me.
Yeah. And I went from covering the courts in Orange County and San Diego, which is a lot of white collar stuff, embezzlement, tax fraud, stuff like that, to covering in San Bernardino. And I always say covering crime in San Bernardino was like covering fashion in Paris. It was like, you have arrived, you're in the big leagues, I mean, it was wild. I'd never seen crime like that before, with just the brutality of it and the oddness of it. And so it was never short for stories. And that's where it led me to go to law school. Was I was sitting in court all day, and I had always wanted to be a newspaper reporter. And the attorneys would turn around and say, hey, they'd call me Scoop. It was my nickname. Hey, Scoop, how did I do on that opening? And I'd say, well, it was okay. The jury's out of the room.
All right.
I'd say, well, it was okay, but I would have talked more about the daughter. And they're like, oh, okay, whatever, And so finally they said, you should go to law school, Scoop.
Really?
Said, why would I go to law school? That sounds horrible. And they're like, no, it's, and I'd gotten married and had our first child, my son, and some family members were in the practice of law as a judge, and they kind of said, hey, man, if you go to law school, we'll help you get a job. And I literally just jumped.
Really?
I mean, yeah, there was a school called Western State College of Law. I was living in Fullerton at the time and up in Orange County. And there was a school in town. And I literally stopped on the way home from the Press Enterprise one day and just said, hey, I want to go to law school. And
wow.
Said, well, are you a college graduate? And I said, well, I went to San Diego State. Does that count? They said, yeah, it counts. And they said, well, have you taken the LSAT? And I said, what's the LSAT? And they said, it's the entrance exam. I said, oh. And they said, and it's in 2 weeks. I said, oh, okay. So I went to Barnes & Noble that night or Borders or whatever and got an LSAT for dummies, and it's a logic test, Okay. It's not about the law, it's logic. And I did well enough that they asked me to go there. Stanford didn't call, but Western State did. And so I started there, and I went 4 years at night, and I'd work all day in the courthouse seeing trials, and then I'd go at night. And
wow.
There was a lot of moments of like, that's not how they do that. I saw them do it like this today.
Yeah.
It was the typical practice, how it's really done versus the textbook of how a motion is argued or how a ruling should happen. And you see how it happens in real life, and then you go back to the textbook and you're like, oh, that's not how it happened. But that happens in anything.
So the lawyers are the ones that said, oh, you should do this.
Yeah. Well, and it wasn't so far of a reach. I found out how much writing is involved in law. I didn't know. And I was going to be like a criminal defense attorney. I wasn't going to do like corporate law. I was going to be like the surfing attorney, right. DUIs or something. So, I just, but I basically took the California bar, didn't pass it, came really close, and just figured, you know what? And then all my friends were coming out of school in like 06, 07, and they were like, I need this thing called a website. Can you help me with a website? And that's kind of how I got into marketing, was I started writing blogs and product, website pages for them, because they liked that we could talk about legal terms in legal terms, and then I could write it in a consumery way, talking about, collateral estoppel or res judicata and all these Latin terms that they use. And I could say, well, that actually means this. And so that was kind of a cross point in my career too, is going from journalist to law school to almost lawyer to marketing. And that's where I started.
I always feel like whenever we are making these shifts in our career, it's this is what I think at the time, and then you kind of look back on it a few years later, and it's like, when do you know it's the moments to pivot, right? Sometimes it's because of family, sometimes it's because, well, my newspaper
folded.
When do you know when to pivot?
Yeah, well, and I it's hindsight, right? Like, I don't really know that I thought of it as pivoting. I've just, throughout my career, I've kind of just followed these doors have kind of opened, and plenty of doors have closed too. And I don't know. I wish I could say I had this grand plan for it, but really I didn't. It just kind of, one thing just kind of led to another. And there were certainly times where I thought, man, I didn't get that job. I'm toast, and something else would come up, and then you look back and you think, God, thank God I didn't get that job at that place, because it all kind of worked out, So I think, to me, it's just keeping your options open. And I have a son who's in college now, who's going to be graduating, and a daughter who's a senior. And I talk to them all the time about, don't try and plan out point A to point B. It's like, it's going to take all these crazy turns. And look at what we do now didn't even exist when we went to college. I mean, So it's like, what's going to be happening when kids that are 17, 18, 20 years old now are out there working? It's like, God only knows. So just staying up to date and staying flexible and open-minded and realizing that it's not always going to be a step forward. You might have to take a step back every once in a while and reconsider what you're doing. But I think as long as you just keep building marketable skills and keep your options open and thinking that you're going to just skate through. I guess some people do that. I didn't do that.
Very few people do.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's very rare. Those are the unicorns. I know that you're still doing a lot of journalism related work now, as we talked about earlier, but in terms of just like, I wrote a story today and it's in the newspaper. Like, what do you miss about writing news stories, any type of journal? What do you miss and what do you not miss about the whole like newspaper thing?
Well, what I don't miss are the deadlines and having to call my wife and say, hey, a train just derailed in Rialto. I got to go out to it, and put the dinner back in the oven. I don't miss that. That was a lot. I do miss because we were kind of the last glory days of journalism before fake news and blogging and tweeting and all that. It was still the newspaper. And I do miss walking down the courthouse hallways and seeing people reading your article and thinking, man, they have they don't even know that that's me. And there was a certain sense of kind of like, that's really cool.
Yeah.
That like that guy's sitting in the courthouse reading the paper and I just walked by. It's kind of a trip, and that people, it mattered back then. And I guess it still matters now, but there's so much more dilution and so much more noise of people blogging and tweeting and posting and it just seems like I can't really imagine. I have friends that are still in the business, newspaper reporters, and I just think, man, how do you do that? Like, how do you compete? Because we used to have a scoop at night, and you'd go home at night and think, man, I hope the other newspaper didn't talk to the brother. If they found the brother, because I went out to his house and he wasn't there, and God forbid, the local paper, because he used to deliver the paper back in the day, he called the San Bernardino Sun instead of us. And then your editor's like, dude, what? They talked to the brother, and you're like, then you're following them, and I used to hate that when you had to follow up. I was like, but getting a scoop is great, being on the other side of that and saying, hey, I somehow talked to that guy's boss and the Sun's not going to talk to him. Nothing against the San Bernardino Sun. They were just a competition back then.
I remember covering high school sports, and you'd go to the campus for this event. And as you're walking down the hallway to say the basketball gym or whatever, and you see all these newspapers, articles that had been cut out and they're thumbed up on the wall. And you're like, that's my story.
Yeah.
That's my story.
That's what I mean. That's pretty cool. It's pretty cool to know that you had that lasting kind of impact.
There is something, it's interesting that you went to law school. There's a number of our other fellow Daily Aztec alums from the exact same era, Jennifer Stone, Ben Sachs, Jen Casey, who all went to law school as well. And this might be a reach, but so much of journalism, it's the pursuit of truth. It's not what we think, it's what we can prove. And I'm wondering for you, and again, if this is a leap, tell me, just the idea that it was this version of the truth that I was seeking as a reporter. And now as a lawyer, I'm still looking for the truth and like finding the exact truth and what we can prove.
Yeah, I think there's an element of that to it. I think for me, it was more the writing. It was more that there's so much writing in terms of motions and declarations and affidavits that you have to do as a lawyer. And I'm admitting, I didn't know there was that much until I went to the first law school class and hey, what does everyone do? And I said, I'm a journalist. And they said, oh, that's good. And I was like, really? And they're like, yeah, there's a lot of writing in law school. And I was kind of like, oh, okay. So I think there's a certain, and like I say, I was going to, if I'd gotten 20 more points on the California bar, I would have been a defense attorney, because I think there's a certain honor in that and seeing to that people get a fair trial and that they're not, falsely imprisoned and things like that. I think just in my heart, that's kind of where I'm at. I don't know that I would have, like I say, I wasn't going to be a tax attorney or estates or something like that, wills. I just had no interest in doing that. I think it's mainly, like you say, it's the fact-finding element of journalism. It's the having to follow the clues. There's a lot of similarities between journalism and law school and law, the practice of law.
Yeah. Is there anything that, when it comes to news gathering, what were like your favorite parts of just gathering news before you sit down to write the story? Even if now, what are your favorite parts of just gathering the information that we're going to put out there?
I mean, I still like telling people's stories. I just, everyone's interesting. We could literally walk out in the hall or out on campus right now and stop somebody, and everybody has something interesting about them. Mm-hmm. And I just love that. And it's all different, And so I always loved that. And so when I'm writing now, I'm always kind of looking for that one quote that I know I can either use it to anchor the piece or be that last punchy quote at the end that kind of sums it all up. And so when I get that quote, I'm always kind of like, okay, good. Mm-hmm. And conversely, when the person's talking and not saying anything quotable, you're sitting there sweating going, please say something succinct, right now. I do, I like it. I mean, and back in the journalism days, it was all about scoops.
Right.
Rushing out to a crime scene and seeing something that the other paper hadn't seen, or knowing that a court hearing was going to happen, and you're sitting there and it's getting ready to happen, and then the door opens and in walks the other reporter, and you're just like, damn it, like I thought I had him, but it was really competitive, and I liked that at the time. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure at 54 years old right now that I'd want to be doing that, but at 24 it was a lot of fun.
I remember times where I'd interview some baseball player, and they'd say something like, you just asked the same question in 3 different ways. And my response would be like, I know, I'm waiting for you to say something good. I got to keep trying to get you to say, I know you're trying to avoid, I'll eventually wear you down. That's journalism.
Well, I do have a baseball story. When I was covering the Daily Pilot, there was a player named Jeff Kent. Who played for the Giants. I know you know him well. And he was from Huntington Beach.
Yep. And his dad was a cop.
His dad, Al Kent, was a lieutenant with the Costa Mesa PD. And the Giants were playing interleague, right?
Interleague play.
Against the Angels. This would have been, 95 maybe, 96, something like that. And something in there. And so that was my Sunday assignment. I got to work Sunday, and they said, well, go out to the stadium. It's Father's Day, and Al Kent's going to be in the stands, and they're going to watch Jeff play. And it's kind of a father's field of dreams, we called it.
Yeah.
And so I go down, I get my credential, and I'm all excited to go down to the clubhouse because I hadn't done much of that. As little as you were in court, that's how little I was in stadiums. And I go down to the locker room, and I say, hey, where's Jeff Kent? And they said, oh, he's at the batting cage. I said, okay, before the game. Right? And so finally he comes in, and he's getting dressed. And I said, is that Kent? And I said, yeah. And of course, I don't know. I don't know who anybody is. And so I go up to him, and I said, hey, I'm with the Daily Pilot. I want to do a story about, you're playing on Father's Day with your dad. And kind of looks at me, and he goes, I'm not interested. And I said, well, and of course I'm seeing this 15 column inch hole on A1 tomorrow if I don't bring this story back. And I said, hey, it's your dad, I'm here, your dad's here. It's Father's Day, just wanted to get a quote, and I kind of just laid it on him, and he's like, okay, what do you want to know? And he felt bad, I think. And I was kind of like, yeah, playing catch in the yard kind of thing. And it was like, I was like feeding it to him.
Right.
And he's like, so I don't know anything about Jeff Kent, but he didn't seem like he had a real warm, fuzzy relationship with his pops. But
there's a lot of tough love there. I covered Jeff Kent. Yes.
I think there was. So anyway, I'm picturing myself walking into that, and I seem to remember something that same day happening where Bonds was stretching or something, and I turned to leave, and I almost tripped over Barry Bonds. I seem to remember, I have a memory of doing something, either opening a door and hitting him with it or something, and I was not made to be a sports reporter. Yeah.
All right. Well, we like to wrap up this podcast by bragging about other San Diego State alums and what they're doing, some type of journalism, communications, someone you know or don't know. So give more shout outs about other alums that make us proud.
I recently ran into the husband now of my college roommate, this guy named Eric Breyer, who's he's an assistant director of public affairs up at Cal State Fullerton. And I recently saw him at an event here on campus, and they're doing great things up there at San Marcos. I'm a North County guy. I went out there when they opened that campus, and I was like, what is this? I mean, it was like one building. And I recently went out there again 25 years later, and I was like, wow. I mean, there's a whole college campus they have out there and a whole community. So Eric, and I think we know some other guys, Tim Meehan is out there, and some other of our contemporaries at the Daily Aztec back in the day, as they say, are out there, and they're doing great things. And so shout out to them.
I remember when I was first starting at the Daily Aztec, and Eric Breyer was the managing editor. It's my first semester, and I wrote some story. And he wrote a handwritten note that he put in my mailbox that he enjoyed the story. And that meant the world to me. I was like, oh my gosh, Eric Breyer, the managing editor, he just wrote me a compliment. I was like, wow, it's so cool.
Keep that note. Yeah, I have a couple of thank you notes that I kept through the years. People that I interviewed that wrote me a nice little note. And
Handwritten notes.
Yeah.
There's something about a handwritten note. It's a beautiful thing, a handwritten note.
Yeah, it is. It's still pretty cool.
Before we wrap things up, anything else that I should have asked that I did not ask about just this conversation about journalism and writing and reporting and SEO and all the different possibilities that are out there for recent alums or long ago alums?
No, I hire JMS students to be my student assistants over at Global Campus. So every fall or so, we look for students who are rising seniors or journalism students, and I put them through their paces over there. And they write a lot of blogs and do a lot of research projects for us, and they're always great, And
if someone wants to do this, how do they get in touch with you?
Well, they could ping me on LinkedIn or email me. But when we're looking to fill it, we post it as a job. And we've had a really good track record with them. A lot of them, the past student assistants, are in agencies now, and PR agencies and advertising agencies. And so I'm really proud that they're out there. I hate when they leave, but I love that they go on to something bigger and better.
That's cool. I like it a lot. Thanks for your time, Tim. This is super fun.
It was fun.
Yeah.
I never would have thought.
Never would have thought.
Back then that we'd be sitting in a podcasting room.
Josh Sushan, the guy covering baseball for the Daily Aztec, is now going to interview me about your time as a lawyer.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. What are you talking about?
What a time to be alive.
Anyway.
My name is Josh Sushan. I'm the host of the Where You At podcast, and that was Tim Grenda. He is Content Strategist, Search Engine Optimization Manager here for SDSU's Global Campus. Thank you for listening to this week's Where You At podcast. We'll talk to you again next week.
Thanks for listening to the Where You At podcast. This is Devin Watley from the class of 2021. Thanks to Martine Marine for creating the music you're hearing right now, and Alex Piscatelli for her work on the podcast name and artwork on social media. And a reminder to SDSU alums, we really want to know where you're at. Tell us about your career. Get involved in the school. There's many ways you can do this, from donating your time or money, mentoring students, to even speaking in classrooms, in person or on Zoom. Your work can help us grow the program and create more opportunities for our students to succeed. Again, thanks for listening. Subscribe to this podcast. Tell your friends. Recommend us a future guest. And go Aztecs.